Yeah.
I would be fine with that, but I think everyone else has things to do. Okay, so in this presentation I'm going to give you a very, very brief overview of the history of the Middle East and the conflicts that have shaped the area to what it is today. Then I'm going to explain what are private military and security companies, which is something that I studied for my dissertation at university. Then I'll tell you why especially different countries use them, why they are very problematic on an international scale, how the United States especially has used private military and security companies, what I learned from doing this and what I learned from reading about it, and how I would teach this topic to students. And I can say already that this would be for the P5 level because the vocabulary is very it's quite advanced, yeah. So here is a quick quote that might open the whole issue of private companies a bit more. So we need more accountability. We need to clarify and update our laws. We need to restore the government's ability to manage any such contracts. So they are talking about military contracts. We need to punish the corporations that commit fraud or undermine our security. Basically, we need to reconsider which jobs should be private and which jobs should remain in the public sector. So this is going to it's going to open a bit more the further we go. And this was the speech that this is apart from was given in this hearing for one of the biggest and probably most infamous private security and military companies called Blackwater. It has since changed its name 2 or 3 times, and this was in 2007, so these days they are still very active, but they no longer go under that name because of the bad publicity. So, a very brief history of the Middle East. So everything, there's obviously been a lot going on throughout the existence of the human race. So the Middle East has been populated since the beginning of time, but obviously for us and for this, what I want to talk about, the beginning is in the 11th century when the Pope ordered the Christians to take back Jerusalem from the Arabs, and this is what we call the Holy War. And it's basically that the European knights went there, fought for a couple centuries, and they were able to get Jerusalem back to the Christians by basically killing all the Jewish and Muslim inhabitants in the city. And then in the mid-15th century, the Ottoman Turks rise, and they begin building their empire, which basically went all the way from Iraq to the other side of Africa, so to Morocco and everything. So that was all part of the Ottoman Empire. And they took over the Constantinople, which was at the time a very important gateway between Europe and the Middle East. Then in the late 18th century, Europe begins to push back, and a very important person at this time is Napoleon, who goes to Egypt. And in 1798, which is actually the same time that France is going through a revolution, they set in motion this competition between different European nations for who gets to keep what parts of the Middle East. So basically they start to compete over this area of land that already belongs to someone else, which is something that Europeans are very well known to do. And for example, the British, they take over Egypt from the French. They also take over Sudan and some of the smaller states in the Persian Gulf, and France then takes Morocco and Algeria, which were under the French regime for a long time, longer than Egypt and the other countries. So then during World War I, the fall of the Ottoman Empire happens because they are they're allied with Germany. And well, it doesn't end well for either of those nations, and Middle East is seized by the Europeans, and basically the territories of Arabia, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon and Palestine fall into the European hands, and the French and the British basically draw new borders to the Middle East, which are pretty much the same what they are now, apart from a few exceptions. And the League of Nations, which was founded after World War I, takes over sort of the domination of the region. And then World War II happens. Europe is basically in shambles, and so the USA swoops in and becomes a major player in the Middle East. The main reason for this is that there's obviously oil. So oil has been found, and they because it's used so much these days in technology and transportation and everything, they want to get hold of it, and they want to be able to establish a very solid foundation for themselves in the area. And then they also want to protect Israel, which is still, to this day, something that the United States is very, very keen on doing. And the third thing that they want to establish is that they want to stop the Soviet Union. So the Cold War is on the way, and it's happening, and they want to prevent this from the area so that they don't become communists. Then after the World War II, there is a rise of radicalism in the Middle East, and there was an Islamic revolution in 1979 in Iran, and soon after that, Soviet Union takes over Afghanistan. There's a war between Iran and Iraq. Iraq invades Kuwait, and the US gets involved. Then there's the Persian Gulf War, and the US comes to the rescue again. And then in the 90s, there is Osama bin Laden and the rise of Al-Qaeda, which is considered to be one of the sort of main players in this the rise of radical Islam in the Middle East, because they provide this new and very visible face for the religion. Then happens the September 11th terrorist attack in New York, and the USA finally throws itself fully into the sort of, they come at the countries in the Middle East with full force, but I'm going to open those a bit more later on. So we have the war in Afghanistan that happened. That's basically from 2001 to 2014, but obviously the dates are you can't really give exact dates from when it's ended, because there's still a lot of US troops in these places. The war in Iraq is from 2003 to 2011, and then we have the Arab Spring, which is something that I think a lot of you have seen in the news. So it started from Tunisia. A man lit himself on fire as a protest, and it spread to Libya, Egypt, Yemen, Syria, and Iraq. And in a lot of other countries, there were also protests, but they never escalated as far as it did in countries like Egypt or Syria. So, for example, in Bahrain, they had an uprising, but because the royal family of Bahrain is closely allied with Saudi Arabia, the Saudis came and quashed the rebellion. Then there's still some internal conflicts going on. The best known is obviously the Syrian civil war, and this is the most significant unrest that we've seen in that region in over 5 decades. So even with all the other wars, this has still been the most devastating. And then obviously we have ISIS, which basically got a big boost because after the Arab Spring, there was this vacuum of, there was no real leaders for these countries that had before been ruled by